Okay, recording in progress. And it's time. It's 7 p.m. Tech Talk begins. So hello, Lane. Thank you so much for making the time to give a tech talk tonight for Columbia University students who are interested in computer science. To everyone listening, thank you for being here during the midterm season. Lane is a writer, he's a technologist and entrepreneur, deeply fascinated by the intersection of technological and social systems, and he's committed to the idea that software can change the world for good. Today, Lane will be talking about blockchain technology as well as careers in blockchain. Lane, we are so glad you are here, and the stage is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Marlene. I appreciate it. Can you hear my audio clearly?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. All right. Let's take it away. Great. So, hey, everybody. I'm Lane. I'm really excited and really honored to be here. As I was preparing for this talk, I realized that I did a talk at Columbia in 2018, believe it or not. So 4 years ago, I think it was April 2018. And that was with one of the blockchain clubs. If I remember correctly, there were like 3 or 4 of them at the time. And I think it was a couple of them that sort of co-hosted events. But it was really fun preparing for this talk for a couple of reasons. One is because a lot of the folks who were in the room at that time 4 years ago have since gone on to do really big things in the blockchain space. And so I think this is really good news because these are folks who 4 years ago knew absolutely nothing about blockchain. And by the way, I've only been in the space for 5 years, right? So I also knew almost nothing 4 years ago, slightly less than nothing. But I think it goes to show that you can go from 0 to 60 miles per hour very quickly in this space. So you all have great things ahead of you. And yeah, also just reflecting on kind of how much has changed since then, because the pace of change is really rapid in this space, obviously. So this title, No One's in Charge, is just kind of an allusion to the decentralized ethos of our space and how kind of the way that we all coordinate and cooperate is changing very rapidly. So that's going to be one of the themes of my talk. So here's a quick outline of what I'm hoping to cover in the next hour. I'll share a little bit about my background and my story and kind of how I got to where I am and how I ended up working on the things I'm working on, kind of my quote unquote rabbit hole journey. You'll hear this rabbit hole term referred to quite a lot in the blockchain crypto space. We'll do kind of a brief background on what blockchain is, what it means, why it matters so much. We don't have time today to do a super deep technical dive. If that's something that's interesting to folks in this community, I'd be very happy to kind of schedule like a much more technical deep dive, and we could kind of bring other folks in as well. I want to keep it kind of high level, so I'll also zoom out and talk about some kind of big themes that I see kind of as motivators for the space, and also just kind of like the direction we're going forward. I'll share some kind of thoughts reflecting on kind of career in the past few years, and then finally conclude with kind of ways to get started. And particularly for anyone who's interested in working full-time in this space, I'll share some advice on that and save some time for Q&A. All right. So who am I? Let's see. So I actually tried to find the most embarrassing photos I could find of me because I don't know, it's humanizing in these talks. So this is me as an undergrad. I studied computer science at UC Berkeley. So a lot of respect for computer science. And actually, funnily enough, I'm from New York originally. And during my summers, I took CS classes at Columbia, and they were among the best and hardest classes I took. So you guys are in very good hands. What can I say? I started my career after undergraduate working for a financial company. I guess we have a term for this now, a TradFi, or traditional finance company. So again, embarrassing photo here. This was probably my first week or two on the job. This was a hedge fund here in New York. Good place to start a career. I learned a lot. I worked very hard. I was on a help desk, so I was kind of like, fielding support requests and answering phone calls. It doesn't sound super sexy, but it was, as I said, like really, really good training for a lot of the stuff that came after. And also, I think just being exposed to like a very rigorous methodology of thinking about problems, a very quantitative way of approaching the world. That set of kind of models and filters, like I still rely very heavily on this today. And also being part of a very functional organization, I think was something that has been very useful later on in my career, especially in this sort of decentralized chaos that's like the blockchain space. A few things happened after that. So I worked in this hedge fund for 6 years in New York and later in Hong Kong. The global financial crisis happened. So I started in 2006. So if you do the math, 07, 08, I got very kind of disenfranchised by the financial world. In particular, just being a very values-driven person, I felt after a few years that in the role I was in, the organization I was a part of, I wasn't able to kind of be on the front lines of moving the needle for humanity and just kind of like acting in line with my values. And so that in combination with the global financial crisis and just sort of recognizing my ignorance with respect to big picture things like finance and economics and business led me to quit the job, to go back to school. I went to graduate school, studied business and international studies. And during my time in grad school, I ended up co-founding a healthcare technology startup. So sorry, that's a long introduction to this photo. So this is my amazing co-founder, Divya, on the right side opposite me, and the CEO of Verizon in the middle. So we ended up building kind of enterprise software for hospitals, and Verizon ended up backing the project. And it was a very exciting whirlwind entrepreneurial experience over about 3 to 4 years, really kind of compressed, raising our first capital and hiring our first employees and building our prototype product and closing our first sales. But I think the thing that, how do I put this? The thing that was the most challenging about this experience was that innovating in the healthcare space was very, very, very difficult for a variety of reasons. One reason is a lot of regulation. Another reason is just kind of bureaucracy and kind of institutional momentum, and the fact that hospitals as customers are very slow moving and very risk averse. And so after a few years working on this project, I needed to take some time off. And it was during what ended up being a sabbatical year that I finally discovered Ethereum. I think, yeah, okay, so this is kind of the beginning of the Ethereum journey. And so I kind of found Ethereum, kind of blockchain in general, and Ethereum specifically by accident at a conference that I was attending in Europe in early 2017. And I think, Bitcoin and Ethereum had kind of been on the back of my mind for some time. I had been aware of them at a high level, but because I had been in this founder mode, I kind of hadn't had a chance to really sit down and take the time to understand what they mean and why they're important. Some of the things we'll talk about today. So that finally happened in 2017. I ended my sabbatical early. I came home to New York. I had been traveling quite a bit, kind of the things you do when you're taking time off and trying to figure out what to do with your life. I had a lot of coffee chats with people. So 2017 was, a time when I guess blockchain was kind of taking off in a big way. There were a lot of exciting meetups and events happening around New York. And I ended up at Ethereum DevCon 3 in Cancun in October of 2017. So that's where this photo was taken. So I met Vitalik and I met sort of the Ethereum Foundation folks and kind of Ethereum core contributors at that community. Long story short, I ended up joining the Ethereum Foundation in late 2017 and spent the next 2 years as a core developer. In this sort of hybrid role where on the one hand, I was very hands-on with the technology of Ethereum, working on a specific component, which is the virtual machine, which again, we can talk about if there's time and if people are interested, but also really quite hands-on with the social side of the Ethereum project. I guess I'm just interested in people and social systems. I think you'll hear me talk quite a bit about that in the next few minutes. And what I found was that the technical side of the Ethereum project was really well served. But the social side was less well served for a whole host of reasons. There weren't so many people thinking about things like sound economics and governance and conflict resolution and kind of philosophical questions that arise in the creation of something like a global decentralized world computer. So anyway, this is a screenshot of my team. We were at, in this case, a hackathon in Buenos Aires. So we traveled quite a bit. We're very decentralized. We had people in 5 or 6 or 7 different countries. That's kind of how the Ethereum Foundation works, and it's how many projects in the crypto space work. I guess you could say we were a little ahead of the curve. The world has kind of caught up a bit as a result of COVID. So things are now more remote than they were, which I think is probably a net positive thing. But yeah, it was a very exciting couple of years. This is a image from, I think, DevCon 4. So this is now autumn of 2018, with a bunch of kind of core developers literally sitting on the floor in a circle, drinking bad coffee in Prague on the sidelines of this conference, probably like late in the evening after the event had concluded, and just kind of like discussing some pretty critical technical challenges that had arisen in Ethereum at that time. This image and most of these images are in a blog post that I wrote. So this one in particular, I'll show you the title of it later. But I did try to kind of like document a lot of my Ethereum journey on Medium and a few other places, because I think it's quite fascinating, kind of how this all played out. And being on the sidelines of it for 2 or 3 years was and continues to be like a source of a lot of kind of joy and inspiration. It's quite exciting and quite interesting. And then I changed gears in 2019 and joined a fledgling project called Spacemesh. And so this is where I have been for the past 3 years in an R&D role. My primary motivation for kind of leaving Ethereum and the Ethereum Foundation was that I wanted to experience the full life cycle of a project. I think of myself kind of as a 0 to 1 type. And so I really wanted to kind of have a hand in the earliest research and development phase of a blockchain smart contract platform. So Spacemesh, I'll talk more about it in a moment, but it kind of does the things Ethereum does. It has smart contracts, has accounts, has cryptocurrency, all this kind of stuff, but it has some nice features and some improvements over the Ethereum design. And so got that opportunity in 2019. And I've been doing that since then. So in a very similar role to the role that I was in Ethereum. So kind of a hybrid where I do R&D, but I also do a lot of kind of advocacy and kind of traveling and speaking and recruiting and kind of wear many hats. So it's a very kind of entrepreneurial role. And then on the side, I think this is also quite common among folks who've been in the space for a few years. You know, you often hear this kind of like Wild West metaphor for the crypto space. And I think one way in which it's true is that we are kind of in some sense pioneers. That, you know, it's still relatively early in the life cycle of these platforms and this community. And as a result, there's an enormous amount of opportunity and an enormous amount of need for different types of products and services that folks are building. And there aren't enough people yet. And so this is good news for anyone who's interested in joining the space. We'll talk about, you know, ways to kind of apply for jobs later. But it also means that, you know, it's hard to do one thing, it's hard to focus. And so I find myself kind of consulting and advising and investing in a number of different kind of projects that my friends and other folks are working on, which is rewarding and very exciting. Cool, okay, so that's my background, kind of a snapshot of who I am, where I come from, what I'm working on. So let's transition a little bit and talk about some blockchain fundamentals and also kind of why they matter. So I think language is important, right? I think we tend to kind of throw words around and not think a great deal about kind of what they really mean or where they come from. And it's unfortunate that we don't have a better term for, I don't know, for this amorphous, you know, thing, which is kind of an industry, kind of a social movement, kind of a bunch of different things, right? So blockchain is one possible term, but that really refers to like a data structure, and it's kind of like I think a little bit inappropriate to use it to describe like a whole industry or a whole space or a social movement. You hear this term, quote unquote, crypto thrown around quite a bit, and I find it really obnoxious because it is totally meaningless, right? Does it mean cryptocurrency? Does it mean cryptography? People refer to crypto or cryptos to, you know, as a shorthand for like the coins. And so I kind of try to avoid this term, although you'll probably hear me use it from time to time because there isn't a better word. My favorite term is Web3, which is also so vague as to almost not be terribly meaningful. And this, I think, you know, refers not so much to the kind of social or financial side, but to kind of the application side. And this is one of the most interesting pieces for me. So anyway, I guess you could say DLT, distributed ledger technology. That's also kind of a mouthful. So we don't really have a good term for this, but you'll mostly hear me say Web3. So background, I think probably everyone here, you know, at this point is familiar with the early story here of Bitcoin, right? So this is the Bitcoin white paper that was published by the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. Pretty groundbreaking piece of work. It's 7 pages long, and if you haven't read it, like definitely just sit down and read it. It doesn't take very long. It's not terribly technical. There aren't too many references. It's I think one of the most important like documents ever published, to be frank. And Bitcoin did many things. It was kind of a bundle of ideas and a bundle of technologies. It was used and united together a number of enabling technologies that previously existed, right? So these are things like peer-to-peer networks, which previously existed in the form of things like Napster and BitTorrent, which you guys are probably familiar with. Hash functions were not new. Merkle trees were not new. They're used by Git. A whole bunch of ideas, even proof of work, right, was not novel. That had actually been invented and used in previous systems. But the real novel thing, the real kind of core of Satoshi's innovation was this permissionless solution to the Byzantine generals problem. So for any folks here who kind of have studied distributed systems, you will have probably been exposed to this idea. This is a body of work that came out in the late 70s, I think. So it's actually like not, this articulation of it is not particularly novel. But the idea fundamentally is like when you have a set of actors who don't necessarily trust one another and are communicating over an untrusted medium, right? So in the case of Bitcoin, this is obviously the internet, right, where messages can be intercepted, messages can be, in theory, tampered with. How do they nevertheless coordinate on a course of action? And so the kind of framing of the Byzantine generals problem is, of course, this set of generals deciding, whether to attack a city or what time to do it, or maybe from what direction to approach. And if they can't achieve consensus, then they're going to fail. And there were workable solutions to this sort of classes of algorithms called classical consensus algorithms like Paxos and Raft, which you may have heard of, that emerged in kind of the 80s and 90s. PBFT, so BFT stands for Byzantine fault tolerance, and then a class of algorithms called PBFT, which came out in the late 90s, practical Byzantine fault tolerance. But what they all had in common was that they didn't really scale, right? So they all kind of require that the set of actors be known ahead of time, and that to the extent that there's any kind of sanctions, they're kind of like reputational sanctions, but there's kind of no like in protocol way or inbound way to punish actors. And if you want to build a system like Bitcoin that scales globally, you need the ability to support many hundreds or thousands, or theoretically even millions of actors in a permissionless fashion. So Satoshi's key innovation was replacing the notion of an identity with the idea of kind of the way he referred to it in the paper is one CPU, one vote, but basically computational power. So that was kind of the groundbreaking, foundational work that led to Bitcoin. And I think, the point to make here is that ledger technology is very far from new, right? It was kind of this enabling technology that has existed for literally thousands of years since the dawn of human civilization, and it's kind of evolved, through several phases. Most recently through things like double entry bookkeeping, spreadsheets, and now in the era of Bitcoin, we have this idea of a distributed ledger. But as you'll probably recognize when you kind of think about it and think of the arc of human history here, the key thing is that everything up to before Bitcoin was centralized, right? So, in the case of double entry bookkeeping, well, someone has the book, right? There's some kind of trusted party, some accountant or scribe or something, right? Who in theory could tamper with the ledger and quote unquote quote the books. In the case of spreadsheets, you either have a master file that someone maintains, or else you have, a spreadsheet posted on Google Sheets, and there's kind of no guarantees in the system that the person who is the kind of root authority of the database won't tamper with it. And Bitcoin was the first technology that allowed us to achieve property that we kind of like to refer to as trustlessness. Which is to say that there is no single trusted authority. And this is a very powerful idea because it prevents corruption, among other things. So this is the most advanced, most sophisticated slide you're going to see in this presentation. I won't use too many like charts or figures or whatever. But as I said, that this idea that the Bitcoin system is a peer-to-peer distributed system is a very, very powerful idea. And Why does it matter? Well, it enables a certain number of properties. So I'll just highlight 3 of them very briefly. The first one is called permissionless innovation. And this is also a big topic and could be the subject of probably an entire university course, if not, yeah, like could go very deep on this. But the high level idea here is that if someone wants to build something on top of a network like Bitcoin, they don't need anyone's permission to do that, right? And again, this is quite novel. If you want to build an application on the Visa network, if you want to talk to banks, if you want to publish something in a book format, prior to the internet, prior to the rise of blogging, you had to go through certain gatekeepers and certain authorities to do that. And when innovation works in a way that anyone can pick up some basic tools and can kind of gain some basic knowledge and get started without needing permission from any authorities to do it, that leads to basically a Cambrian explosion of creativity and innovation and ideas. And that's exactly what's happening in the cryptocurrency space. And I think this ties directly back to my story coming from the healthcare space, where innovation was anything but permissionless. And I found it very refreshing and very exciting seeing types of things people are creating all around the world. And again, in a day and age when we're recognizing that there's a lot of kind of systemic unfairnesses and inequalities in the way the world works, I think permissionless innovation is an extraordinarily, almost uniquely powerful tool that we can rely on to help democratize access to all sorts of things, to education, to participation in the modern economy, et cetera. Another critically important property of Bitcoin and other blockchain, Web3, and for that matter, just kind of decentralized networks, is this concept of censorship resistance. Again, this is a huge topic, and I could speak about this for hours. But if I had to just say a word about it, it would be that it's pretty clear in this day and age that freedom of speech is on the one hand, a foundational, how do I put it? Is a foundational attribute of democracy and of freedom. It's always been absolutely essential, very important, and it is now more than ever. But we live in an era where kind of cancel culture has become kind of a big thing, and the reality is we have kind of internet giants that have exercised a great deal of control over the things we see and the things we're able to say. And that's not even to speak of authoritarian states, of the Chinas and the Russias and many other authoritarian states in the world. And I think that decentralized networks are one of the few reliable tools we have to push back against censorship. And it's more important now than ever. And trust, this is also a big topic, but I think in a nutshell, what I would say about this is that we also live in an age of kind of an unparalleled degree of questioning authority and questioning received wisdom and kind of questioning the set of institutions that govern the world, the de facto kind of status quo world. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And I think what decentralized, quote unquote, permissionless tools give us is a very powerful alternative architecture to conceive of and architect systems where we can be, it's not, the reason I put this term trustless in kind of air quotes is because there is always trust. It's not that trust doesn't exist, it's that we can be very mindful and intentional about where we put the trust. And in particular, especially as technologists, but I think increasingly just as ordinary people, it makes sense for us to place trust in systems that have this property called credible neutrality, which is that there's kind of a simple set of rules that are visible to everyone, and everyone is on a level playing field and plays by the same rules, as opposed to putting trust into fallible human institutions, into whether that's the board of a company or a centralized company where you have no say, you have no ownership in that company, or for that matter, the nation state, where again, if you're unfortunate enough to live in a place that's not a democracy, you truly have no say. And even if you do live in a democracy, well, it's complicated. So yeah, powerful new tools to rethink trust and build better trust systems. So that's all about Bitcoin. So let's kind of very quickly introduce Ethereum as well, because I think it's also extraordinarily important in the blockchain story. So the way I like to tell the story I think I actually borrowed this description originally from Vitalik and from the way he's told this story before. So credit where credit is due. Bitcoin is kind of like a glorified pocket calculator, right? So it's a very simple ledger. It allows coins to be sent, and you can kind of tally up how many coins you have. But that's really the only application that Bitcoin implements. And to be clear, it does that very, very well, but it's not particularly flexible. What happened after Bitcoin, interestingly enough, so if you go back to kind of 2013, 2014, that era, there was a number of blockchains that attempted to kind of bolt on additional features. And they became the quote unquote kind of Swiss Army knives of blockchains, where they said, okay, Bitcoin's a big knife, but maybe we want to add a corkscrew, maybe we want to add a can opener, something like that. And they did this through things like colored coins, so like tweaking the protocol, adding kind of new properties or exploiting properties of the Bitcoin protocol. But the challenge with doing things this way is that every time you want to change something or add something, you have to do what's called a hard fork and coordinate everyone and change the core code of the protocol, which is sort of not sustainable. And so the idea behind Ethereum was to be something more like a smartphone with an app store, right? So a general purpose platform with these things called smart contracts that could be developed and deployed independently without relying on protocol upgrades, without having to go through that process. So that was kind of the inspiration for Ethereum. Another metaphor I've heard, which is very useful, is that Ethereum is macros to Bitcoin's Excel spreadsheets. So kind of just adding programmability to the ledger, which I think is a helpful metaphor. If you are interested in the technical details of Ethereum, again, unfortunately, I don't have time to get into them today. If that is something that's interesting to people, I'd be very happy to do a deep dive in the technical aspects and architecture of Ethereum. However, there's a book called Mastering Ethereum that came out a couple years ago that I highly, highly recommend. You'll hear me mention the name of this gentleman, Andreas Antonopoulos, a few times in this talk. He's done really important work on documenting and making these technologies more accessible. So I recommend starting there. The book starts high level, but goes quite technical very quickly. And you'll learn pretty much everything about Ethereum as it exists today, with the caveat that Ethereum is rapidly evolving. I'll talk a little bit about that, but again, we could talk about that more in the future if it's interesting. Also on the kind of social human side of the story, so this was not the case in 2018, but there are now at least 2 books, I suspect there's a couple of others, that tell kind of the human story of Ethereum. The Infinite Machine came out a couple years ago, and the Cryptopians, the book on the right here, actually this just came out 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's brand new. I've read both of them. I recommend them both. They tell the story in orders of magnitude more detail than I could tonight, but I think that they do a really good job of kind of explaining kind of how this all happened, and again telling kind of the human side of the story, which is really fascinating. And I'll just briefly throw in a few words about Spacemesh. I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about like what I'm working on and why I'm excited about it. We have a handful of innovations on top of Ethereum. So probably the most important one is this consensus mechanism called proof of space-time. So Ethereum and Bitcoin use a mechanism called proof of work, which at a high level means that, and I'm sure folks have heard about this, right? You have to do this thing called mining, and that means expending a lot of electricity to pay for CPUs or GPUs or ASICs, which are application-specific integrated circuits, so just sort of specialist machines to compute hash functions, which is how you secure the ledger and earn coins. A lot of these protocols, including Ethereum, are moving towards a novel mechanism called proof of stake, which involves staking the native asset of the network rather than spending electricity to become eligible for earning rewards and securing the ledger. We dislike both of these, or aspects of both of them, I should say, and so we've developed a novel consensus mechanism called proof of space-time. It's a very fancy name that has nothing whatsoever to do with time travel or outer space. Basically, it means you commit free hard drive space to the protocol. So we kind of emulate proof of work mining by filling up something on the order of 100 or 200 gigabytes of hard drive space that you have free on your hard drive with cryptographic junk, with deterministic cryptographic junk, which is the scarce resource that you're expending to become eligible for mining. We modify the blockchain topologies, the data structure, and move towards a mesh, otherwise known as a directed acyclic graph, for various reasons I could get into, but scalability is a big one. The core kind of differentiator for Spacemesh is this idea of mining from home. This was a big part of my motivation for joining the project. I mentioned a couple times that I think of blockchain and crypto as a democratizing technology. And I think it's kind of a shame that after a few years, Bitcoin and Ethereum, and for that matter, pretty much all the large protocols require an extraordinarily large capital expenditure, acquisition of specialized equipment to be able to mine and participate in that process of securing the ledger. So Spacemesh is totally designed and architected in such a way that you can mine from home on whatever hardware you already have. We think a lot about economics, both how to make sure that home miners are not priced out based on the unit economics of the protocol, and also just ensuring that we have this kind of fair distribution of coins very, very, very far into the future, further than Bitcoin, which I'm very proud of. And we make some important tweaks and improvements to the smart contract model from Ethereum. Again, a lot of fun technical details here. If you guys are curious, ask about it in the Q&A. I'd love to talk about it more, but I'm gonna keep moving for now. This is a $200 Chromebook, I don't know, $150 Chromebook that I have at home. And just to put things in perspective, I was able to successfully mine Spacemesh on this machine for about a month. This has a really crappy processor, like a Celeron or something, maybe dual core, maybe single core, I can't remember, 2 or 4 gigabytes of memory. Yeah, so we have a vision that you'll be able to mine Spacemesh even on a Raspberry Pi like this, or a mobile phone in the future. I think that's important for decentralization. This is a glance at the Spacemesh application. So we have a front-end application, and it really is super easy, super simple. You download the thing, there's a wizard that'll install it for you and walk you through the process of allocating hard drive space, and then you're up and running. And you kind of minimize the thing, keep it running in the background. It's not at all resource intensive. You'll start earning coins. We do have a testnet running, so if that's interesting, take a look, reach out, happy to chat about it. And so zooming out again to kind of the overall blockchain landscape, especially for anyone listening to this who is really interested in kind of cutting edge computer science, we have a host of really genuinely deeply fascinating, interesting computer science problems that we are solving in this space, or trying to solve, I should say. So proof of work alternatives, I mentioned proof of stake and proof of space time. So that's kind of in the distributed systems consensus area. Scalability is, of course, a very hot topic in blockchains. How do we improve the situation where most of the existing layer 1 blockchains can only process on the order of about 10 transactions per second? There's a technology called rollups that operate at layer 2. So layer 2 refers to an application layer. So they run as smart contracts on these layer 1 blockchains, and you get this nice multiplier effect that kicks in. So that's a very active area of research. Modular blockchains. So historically, blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum were monolithic in the sense that you have a single application that kind of does everything. We're moving into a future now where, as this technology matures, as with any technology that matures, it's kind of breaking up into different pieces. So we have kind of multiple layers. We have kind of layers that are just doing data, and layers on top of that that are interpreting that data and doing interpretation and computation, things like smart contracts and virtual machines. And I think that this is kind of how blockchain scales. I gave a talk on this topic at a conference recently. You can find that on YouTube if you're interested in this topic of modular blockchains. Post-quantum cryptography, for any of the cryptographers in the room, check out some of the stuff that the various protocols are doing there. That's really cutting edge work being done on that. Zero knowledge proofs are moon math, so very hard to kind of understand, but extraordinarily important primitives that enable really amazing applications, including both privacy and scalability. And again, just enormous progress being made on these. So if this is interesting to you, happy to share resources and connect you to folks working on that. And looking even further down the road, I think what's kind of just becoming visible to me now on the horizon is a technology known as SMPC, or secure multi-party computation, which I won't say a lot about because I don't completely understand it, but it's the idea that you can use technologies like homomorphic encryption to encrypt a piece of data and have a whole bunch of nodes in a network perform computation on that data in a zero knowledge fashion, so without being able to see the underlying data, and reassemble that data at the end and decrypt the result. It's a very, very powerful idea. And I think it's an idea in combination with some of the other things in this list that's really going to power the application infrastructure and architecture of the next couple decades. Again, if you're interested in any of these areas or problems, like, please reach out. I'll share contact info at the end. There's really great teams working on all these things. Great potential research projects, whether that's for a thesis or a summer job or a full-time job. Okay, so zooming out again, I want to touch upon some big themes and kind of how Web3, blockchain, crypto influence them. This is kind of, I don't know, this is kind of where my head's at, and this is kind of, I think, like again, part of the why these things matter. So the first topic here is institutions. I'm just pulling up some notes here on the side. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but we have this kind of like set of, I like to call it like kind of social furniture in the room, right? And these are things like companies, like banks, like the way employment tends to work today. So kind of smaller institutions like that. We have kind of mid-sized institutions like cities and city governments and the way they work. And then at the kind of macro scale of the spectrum, we have very large institutions like nation states and the governance of nation states. And I think I have a quote here. So this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. Theo Wilson said that the real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And it's terrifically dangerous and is approaching a point of crisis. I think this kind of sums up the state of the world really terrifically. Our institutions are really old and are really not keeping up with the pace of change and the pace of technology. And that is a big problem, and it's sort of surfacing in several ways. Again, the most obvious example of this is the nation state. It is kind of the biggest, most important institution. We're seeing this begin to fray around the edges in a number of ways. Like the most obvious example right now is what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. Of course, there's countless other examples. I've also done talks on this topic. I think this is a fascinating topic. I'd be happy to share those or talk more about it in the future. How does kind of blockchain or Web3 fit in? Well, we have this new powerful set of tools, this new powerful set of primitives, including crypto economics, that allow us to design and build better incentive systems. So this is a quote from Vitalik talking about his definition of crypto economics. I won't go super deep into this right now, but just emphasizing that, again, I often refer to Ethereum, or for that matter, smart contract platforms, as a operating system for building better human institutions. And tools like crypto economics, these incentive structures, are the underlying primitives that allow us to do that. And I think that over time, you'll see more and more institutions in the kind of default off-chain pre-crypto world begin to be replaced by institutions based on things like crypto economics and the new trust models. Another theme or kind of thesis that I like to talk about is this idea that, while software is eating the world, to paraphrase, I think it was Mark Andreessen who said that, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, software is actually really, really broken. It's a total mess right now. I know it kind of feels like we have these amazing, smartphones and software and internet tools and all this kind of stuff, but I kind of challenge you to actually really pay attention for 24 hours to every time something goes wrong with a piece of software you try to use, right? Every time you get a little spinning icon and something kind of fails to load, or an app kind of crashes or freezes, or you get kind of pop-ups, or basically software gets in the way of something you're trying to do. And I think that there's a host of reasons why this is the case. I think kind of the incentives behind software and the business models are very fragile right now. It's also, software's just gotten too complicated. So this is a fun example. There was a Hacker News piece. This was, I don't know, about 6 months ago or something, from a gentleman named Kent Dodds, who I think is a pretty well-known figure in the JavaScript space. And he kind of seriously or facetiously, I'm not sure, posted this really funny article about how he built a quote unquote modern website in 2021. And it was a great article, by the way. It's linked. You can see it's down here. You can kind of just Google it, right? How I built a modern website in 2021. He posted, 20 or 30 pages of kind of notes about all the kind of tooling he needed, right? This is his deployment pipeline. This is his authentication flow. some more screenshots from the article, right? Here's the list of technologies that were used. Here's the services the site uses. I think this is more services, JavaScript stuff. This is like the list of I guess sort of APIs that he's hitting. I have no idea what a fly request replay is, but if anyone here knows, like, please tell me later. Right, and so this is what someone replied. They said, I honestly can't tell if this is satire or not. So it's gotten unbelievably complicated to build even simple applications, simple kind of like web and mobile applications. And so I think that we need a radical rethink of kind of software and how we architect applications. And I think that Web3 gives us a powerful set of tools and a powerful opportunity to do that. Oh, there, okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So it gives us a chance to kind of get things right, but we have a lot of work to do. This is an image from a piece that I wrote about how Ethereum often feels like a casino. You'll often hear this term shitcoin casino thrown around. There are, many kind of thousands of cryptocurrencies out there, and they're not all created equal. And it's challenging, right? I think we need to find a way to help folks educate themselves about what this kind of technology is and why it matters, and kind of the social movement here behind it, while avoiding kind of outright scams and understanding like where the value is and where the value will accrue. And that's a task on our plate that's very much a work in progress. I mentioned this article earlier. I think governance is, again, a huge topic that have written and spoken quite a bit about and would be happy to talk more about. But I've written a lot about kind of the governance of Ethereum and the challenges it faces. Here's an image from that article that shows a literally backroom meeting where we had some key influencers, key thought leaders in the Ethereum space in this room, kind of responding to a crisis that was happening at that time. I'd like to point out that it is a back room, but the door was open actually, which is kind of nice. But anyway, to summarize, if to the extent that we feel that kind of Web3 infrastructure and these applications are the future of society potentially, or at least the future of our kind of technical architecture, we need to think long and hard about how to govern these systems and how to do so fairly, and how to make sure that we have transparency and accountability and democracy and all these kind of like things that matter. And we've done a really terrible job of that so far. So I want to recognize those challenges. Privacy, also a huge topic. I want to bang this drum very, very briefly. If there's one thing I've kind of come to appreciate in this community over the past few years, it's that privacy is absolutely essential, and it's very nuanced, and it's kind of something that I think many of us, especially those of us who are fortunate enough to live in relatively free societies, places where we have things like freedom of speech, we don't always deeply appreciate how important privacy is. I think if you come from an authoritarian country, you probably get this a little bit better. But I think in a nutshell, what I would say, so I'm paraphrasing someone here, I apologize, I forget who said this, but basically everything valuable in society, every kind of social innovation, every new idea started out as basically illegal, right? It started out as like, as a crazy fringe idea, like, I don't know, empowering women, like how about giving women the right to vote, or gay marriage or whatever, like all these kind of like ideas that to us today are absolutely no-brainers and are absolutely essential parts of modern society. They were very dangerous ideas at one point in time. And so I think that the thing I'd say about privacy is that, while we don't always appreciate its importance, if to the extent that we want and expect our society to keep advancing and improving in ways that really matter, we need to make sure that people have safe places to discuss heretical ideas without fear of kind of being canceled or being thrown in jail or something. And there was this group of people known as the cypherpunks, who emerged in the 90s as the internet was kind of getting going, and had some early kind of battles and victories, like responding to this is probably ancient history for anyone listening to this, but like there's this thing called the Clipper chip that the US government tried to get put into computers in the 90s, that would kind of hard code a unique identifier into each computer that the government could use to kind of like trace transactions and figure out who's behind things. And also there were these strong export restrictions on certain privacy technologies, certain types of encryption And the cypherpunks kind of fought both of these, successfully hacked the Clipper chip, which is a great example and a really wonderful story. Anyway, this is a group of people who were deeply skeptical of government, were kind of very libertarian and recognized the importance of privacy. And Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto emerged from this movement. So Satoshi was a very active cypherpunk. There was a particular cypherpunk community and mailing list, and this is kind of the lineage out of which Bitcoin and cryptocurrency emerged. And I think if you want to understand this culture and the society and where this community is coming from, it's very helpful to take some time to kind of understand who the cypherpunks were and what they cared about. Future of work is another topic that I think a lot about. I'm going to kind of speed up a little bit because I've got a few slides left, and I want to make sure to finish and leave time for Q&A. But again, we can double click on any of these topics if folks are interested in them. I think we have this traditional employment model where people go to work for big corporations, and not too long ago we're kind of expected to stay in a single role or a single company for life, and obviously that's changed. And firms exist because of certain efficiencies, right? So there's this concept called the theory of the firm, which is a very foundational, important idea. And the point I want to make is that all this is changing. This idea of kind of company A, company B, transaction costs, vendors, suppliers, all this stuff, it's very much in flux. It's as if someone stuck a fork in it and just kind of stirred it all up. And the world we're moving to looks very, very different, right? Where we have gig economy, and we have worker collectives and cooperatives, and we have these things called DAOs, right? So DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and they've emerged in a big way, and they've even begun to participate in other markets, right? So there's this great example of this Constitution DAO that bid unsuccessfully to buy a copy of the U.S. Constitution last year, but still a big deal that they were able to raise $30+ million to do this in a matter of days. There's a number of DAOs that are collecting funds to fund humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. And so I think the future of work looks more like this than it does the gold watch. I have this thesis that I call neo-artisanism, and the idea is that I think that we're moving towards an artisan style future where, harkening back to kind of the way things were before the Industrial Revolution, we have individual makers and thinkers and creators who kind of gain skills and have direct relationships with multiple customers, and that could be multiple projects they contribute to, or DAOs or something like that. And they have a deep sense of pride in the work that they do and kind of transact on their own terms. That's kind of the key message here around the future of work. And I think that this is a very important thing to understand for folks who are moving into the global economy now. Okay, I'll move through this very quickly. I am not in a position to really offer advice. I'm sort of not distant enough, I think, from kind of a lot of the challenges that I think folks listening to this might be facing, but I will nevertheless do my best and offer a few quick words of wisdom. I think the first one is, as you're contemplating your path forward, your career choices, what to spend time on, you should be very mindful about the things you optimize for. And in particular, recognize that there's kind of different types of capital. And chasing money and financial capital is, it turns out, with the benefit of hindsight, a suboptimal thing to do, because other forms of capital, intellectual capital, but in particular social capital, are far more valuable than financial capital, because it can be turned into financial capital very easily. Read and write a lot. This is really basic, but it's so important. We live in this world where we're just inundated constantly by really low quality content on various social media platforms. I won't name any of them, but I think you kind of know the guilty parties. I think it's critical to take the time to actually read real books, to understand the lessons of history, and it just totally changes the way you look at the world. You just start seeing patterns. And it's I heard someone, I think it was Patrick Collison, the co-founder of Stripe, say that studying history is like learning cheat codes for the future, because the future is looks a lot like the past. And I recommend writing. I'm terrible at it, but I do it. I force myself to do it because it's just a way to organize my thoughts. I think composing your story, telling your own story, doing your own thing is really important. Don't try to play by anyone else's playbook. This is a really useful task for kind of figuring out what order you want to do things in your life. I think that if you look at the most successful people in the world, the single quality that they have in common, the single most common quality is generosity. This is not immediately obvious, but there's a gentleman named Adam Grant who is an organizational psychologist. He's also a professor at Wharton. He was my professor in business school. He's written on this. He has a book called Give and Take, if you're interested in this topic, but generosity is absolutely essential. So just give in every opportunity that you have to do that. Finally, prioritize your health. Like, I can't tell you the number of people I've seen burn out, the number of people who have run into like physical or mental health issues. I know this is a talk about like blockchain and cryptocurrency, but it doesn't matter. Like, really take time off when you need it, prioritize your health, everything else will follow. Okay. Sorry, I know I'm going really, really fast, but I want to close now with just a few resources, and we'll go into Q&A with whatever time we have left. So for folks who are kind of new to the blockchain, cryptocurrency, Web3 space, I mentioned Andreas Antonopoulos earlier. He has been an educator in the space for something like 10 years, has a number of books and talks. So I mentioned Mastering Bitcoin, Mastering Ethereum. There's also Internet of Money. There's a series of books here. He's got a lot of talks on YouTube. Check those out. Vitalik has a blog, vitalik.ca, with really thoughtful, high quality content. Crypto Zombies is one example of a tool that you can use to learn Solidity and learn smart contract development if that's interesting to you. I can share these slides. I know this is like a link to a GitHub repository that just has a lot of like great reading material here if you want to become a developer on smart contracts or Ethereum. Really, if I had one piece of advice to give, it would be go to in-person events. Attend conferences, attend hackathons, attend meetups. There's a lot of them here in New York, high quality ones. There's a lot of great events globally, wherever you are. And like, that's been the number one thing for me, because there's only so much you can learn from like reading documents and stuff. At the end of the day, you need to like meet people and interact. You know, we have the benefit that almost everything we're building is open source, and you can find it on GitHub, and you can kind of dive in and roll up your sleeves and start contributing. For folks who are more kind of academically oriented, take a look at this ETH Research Forum. Oh, I see Raymond shared the links. That's amazing. Thank you, Raymond. Okay. This is ways to reach me. So Twitter is the best platform for me. My DMs are open. You can send me a message there. I'm Rettig on Twitter. Spacemesh.io is the homepage for my project. Ethereum.org and applescotch.com. These are blogs where I've written about basically all the topics I've spoken about. You can find a lot more content there. And I recently started a Substack, which you can find at rettig.substack.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter and talk about a lot of these things. Yeah, like, think about kind of values and goals. Think about what success means to you as you think about next steps. Be careful, as I said before, about what you're optimizing for. Life is a journey, not a destination. I love recommending books. This is one of my favorite books ever. It's called Springboard. It was very, very helpful for me as I was kind of thinking about what success means to me and what next steps to take in my career. It was kind of non-obvious. And I think a lot of the kind of traditional metrics that our families and society the expectations they place on us are not necessarily in line with my own kind of values and beliefs. And so this book kind of helped me figure out what success means to me and how it's very subjective. I promised to talk about finding a job in the space. I think this is my last slide. Thank you for bearing with me. So some recommendations. Number one, it's just different. Like, crypto is a different space with a very different mindset. And so kind of be prepared for that, right? It's going to look and feel different than joining an investment bank or a consulting company, or for that matter, a big tech company. Part of this is cultural reasons. I talked about the cypherpunk movement. I think it really is worth spending some time to understand, reading the cypherpunk manifesto, understanding where the cypherpunks were coming from, why privacy matters, why we believe in decentralization, why so many of these projects and teams are leaderless and very flat organizational structures, and lean into this kind of like idea of organized chaos, which has some strengths and some weaknesses. It's not for everybody, but it is novel and exciting. This next bullet point, coding is essential. This is, I don't think I need to emphasize this with this group, but we very much in this community kind of lead with code, which isn't to say there aren't lots of places for folks who add value in ways that are not writing code. And in fact, this has improved quite a bit since I talked to Columbia students 4 years ago. But to the extent that you are comfortable with code, you will find a warm welcome in this community. Again, I mentioned conferences, hackathons, meetups. I think that they're also the most powerful networking tool, the most powerful tool for finding a job. I think the vast majority of jobs in the world, but maybe even more so in our space, happen through personal connections. We tend not to sort of have overly professionalized HR staff, and we tend not to rely too much upon like CVs and resumes and kind of traditional job application processes. And so I really recommend leaning into networking. And I think the most important message here is that it's permissionless. I talked about permissionless innovation earlier. I think the biggest mistake I see job applicants or folks who want to join projects like Ethereum or Spacemesh for that matter, the biggest mistake people make is like asking for permission and saying, okay, I want to help, like, what can I help with? Like, the strongest advice I can give you is to just roll up your sleeves, just dive in, go to GitHub. There's dozens of like tasks and issues that, we try to triage them and label them and make it clear kind of like which ones you should start on and which ones we need the most help with. And by far, this is like the best way to get hired, at least as a developer. It's, a little bit more nuanced if you want to do something very different. But you have the benefit as a developer of being able to dive into GitHub. And a lot of the folks that we hire and that I've hired have come in that way. And finally, we're hiring. Everyone is hiring. A number of the projects that I'm kind of advising or have invested in are also hiring. So it's a really, really, really excellent time to be looking for a job in this space, really, regardless of your background, regardless of your level of interest. That runs the gamut from internships to part-time jobs to, of course, full-time jobs to potentially joining as a co-founder in a project. Everyone is hiring across the board. So if you're interested in joining the space, reach out. Tell me now, send me a DM on Twitter, something like that, and I will be very happy to connect you. All right, again, thank you guys so much for listening to me for so long, for your patience. I'm happy to stick around and take questions.
Thank you so much for your talk, Lane. That was both insightful and inspiring. And now, everyone, Lane will kindly answer our question. If anyone has questions to ask, please raise your hand. And then unmute. Alex?
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yes, say Alex.
Hi there. So one of the sort of questions that I had that came up a little bit was, it's very difficult to kind of condense, but to what extent do you see that the evolution of this kind of process is going where you'll be able to effectively communicate with the public and to actually disperse, information about this technology, condense it in such a way that people can understand? Like, to what extent are you seeing progress in this ability? Are you seeing like interference from corporations or from government entities? What are your thoughts on that? Is kind of my question.
Yeah, I think I understand your question. Let me just clarify. So I think I talked a little bit about this, that like, in order for kind of blockchain or Web3 to like work, it needs to be usable and accessible to everyday people, understandable. And so like, how are we doing on progress along those lines? But the piece about like governments or companies interfering, I guess that's like a question about compliance and regulation and stuff, right?
Yeah, well, I was referring sort of like to almost like the spread of information, whether or not, how to convince people, those people who are kind of naysayers to a degree, like to what extent do you see people being able to counter these kind of counters in themselves?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I think I understand. Thank you for clarifying. So there are, how do I put it? There's been a lot of kind of narratives and a lot of commentary pushing back on Web3, just for context, right, over the past few months. And I think it's very positive, right? I think it's positive because it kind of shows that people are aware of what's going on. Like a few years ago, people weren't even talking about it because they weren't aware of it. some of that commentary is constructive, some of it's not, right? So people saying like, oh, Bitcoin's a scam, Ethereum's a scam, like that's not constructive and not terribly helpful. But a lot of the commentary has been really thoughtful and really constructive. So I'll mention one piece, and this is from Moxie Marlinspike, who is the creator of Signal, right, which is an encrypted messaging app that many of you probably use or you should be using. I don't remember the exact title of the piece, but if you Google Moxie and Web3, you'll find the article. And like Moxie talks about how actually a lot of the technology that underpins Web3 or that we're relying on is like actually more centralized, and like people don't want to run their own servers. And there's been a number of other folks who have penned some like pretty great commentary. And I have to set up links. I'm happy to share them as well. Boy, how do I answer that question? It's tough. I think it's a battle of narratives, and I think that ultimately, what we need to be doing is, I would say, twofold. I would say first, we need to just build usable applications. Period. That's it. And we haven't done a great job of that so far. A lot of smart contract based like dApps, right? Decentralized applications are like super hard to use. The on-ramps, the onboarding process is really, really hard and really clumsy. The tools for like managing your private keys and things are like still kind of clumsy, and it's easy to make mistakes. And there are a lot of like scams and things out there. But with the benefit of 5 years of perspective, I can say we've come a very long way. And I think the answer is like keep building, right? Build better tools, but best practices are emerging. The UX will get better on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think we need to engage with the world as a community, as an industry, and I think that the cypherpunk mentality, going back to the cypherpunks I keep mentioning, is kind of like privacy maximization. We don't want to engage. We don't want to talk to journalists. We don't want to like get on stage at conferences and like present what we're building. We kind of want to just like do our own thing in the corner. And I think that's not helpful at the stage we're at, right? We need a lot of engagement politically. We need engagement commercially in the marketplace. We need to be educating politicians about what we're doing and why it matters. So yeah, I think we need advocates. And so again, if that's something anyone listening is interested in doing, like talk to me. I have people I can connect you with, resources to share. It's an excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I have a question for Web3. Oh, actually, Faustina, please go ahead and ask your question, Elaine. I'll ask my question last.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for the talk. Like, it was really interesting and just made me feel like excited about it, even though I don't know much about it. And just even
I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you for telling me that.
And even like just excited for like my personal path like going on, which is really cool. But anyway, like I was wondering that obviously there's a lot of pushback and resistance when it comes to these, like incumbent institutions, like financial institutions and everything. Like, how do you see, like what's the path to like moving forward with that? Like, is it about, like getting the public engaged so, they kind of demand more, or like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think we're dealing here with a set of very disruptive technologies, disruptive innovations. And it's pretty much always the case that when you have these like disruptive technologies and tools and innovations, there's a pushback on the part of the incumbents. This is a pattern that's played out again and again and again. It certainly played out with the original emergence of like the internet and personal computing, right? And it's happening now, beginning to happen now with respect to things like financial institutions, and it's true of banks. It's true of like central banks as well, and governments and control over currencies, all this kind of stuff. I think there's kind of like two approaches, and I alluded to them earlier. So I think there's kind of the I'm just going to go ahead and call it the cypherpunk approach on the one hand, and then there's kind of the like more engaged, constructive approach on the other hand. This is actually interesting. Also, this tension exists in our space and has existed for a while, and it's also something I've written about and spoken about. Like, if it's a topic that's interesting, I can share more resources on it. The kind of like one approach, the kind of cypherpunk approach, is relatively naive, and it's kind of like, look, it doesn't matter what the world thinks. It doesn't matter what governments or central banks think. Or companies. this stuff is a steamroller. It's coming, and you're going to have to deal with it, like it or not. Bitcoin is a thing that can't be uninvented. It's not going away. You can't crush it, right? Like you can kind of crack down on it. Like we saw a crackdown in China last year of Bitcoin mining, but the miners just moved somewhere else, and literally within a matter of days, like the hash power in the network was right up to where it had been, right? So it really is like a force to be reckoned with. And so I think, yeah, so this kind of like very aggressive approach is like this force of nature approach, and it kind of says like, we don't care, we're going to do our own thing. And then I think there's also on the flip side a bit more of a constructive approach that kind of favors engagement and dialogue with existing institutions and governments and politicians, and tries to kind of like bring people around to understanding why this stuff matters, and in particular that it doesn't have to be so adversarial, right? I think that there's a lot that like really smart institutions, whether they're companies or even nation states, they'll be able to benefit enormously if they lean into this. And I think like El Salvador is a good example of this, right? So El Salvador is a sovereign nation state that made Bitcoin it was the first one to do this, right? They made it a form of legal tender, like a legal currency last year. And the government has like been issuing like Bitcoin backed bonds, and like just like, I mean, El Salvador is like a bit of a wacky, unique case, but I think it does kind of show that there is another path forward. So where am I going with this? I guess, you could probably tell my bias from the way I'm describing this. Like, I think we need a more engaged activist approach. And I think that the problem with the kind of cypherpunk approach is that inevitably we're going to get pushback, and we're going to get like, especially the authoritarian governments, like trying to shut crypto down, and ultimately like probably throwing people in jail and things like that. And I think that that's just not a helpful path forward. So reiterating what I said earlier, it's really about engagement. It's about political engagement. It's about education. And I think it's about just keeping our heads down and just building better, like just building better solutions to the problems we face. I think people will wake up to the value over time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the great question.
Thank you, Wayne. Raymond, and then the cooler.
Hey, so once again, I want to thank you so much for giving this wonderful speak. For me personally, I am always thought that this only revolved around a specific type of online like, I thought that crypto only focused around making online money, cash, right? But after hearing you talk, like, I didn't know that there was so much more into it than just that. And then so that makes me question, like what is the true purpose of this form of technology? Like what is the ultimate goal of this happening within our future?
It's a really great question. And the fact that you're questioning things, I can't tell you how much joy that brings me. That's like, I think like my number one goal, I think, talking about this stuff, just planting seeds of doubt and curiosity. Let's see. I think I like to talk about the 3 levels of the crypto rabbit hole, right? Again, this rabbit hole metaphor. So I think like kind of the kind of highest level and the entry point for most people is the kind of financial aspect of it, the economic aspect. I think that that's totally okay. It's relatively easy to understand. You buy your first Bitcoin, your first Ether on Coinbase or Gemini or something like that. Like that was certainly my first touch point. And I think even that in and of itself is already significant and important, because especially there are people in parts of the world where there's like, very high inflation, hyperinflation, the kind of like Argentina's and Venezuela's and Turkey more recently, and we have stuff going on in Russia and Ukraine now, right? Even just giving people access to like money that's kind of sovereign and not part of not controlled by a central bank is already quite powerful, right? A level below that, you get to the tech, right? And I think for a lot of folks here, like the tech, may be at least as interesting, if not more interesting, than the money or the financial side. And this gets into like Web3, this idea of what does a decentralized application model look like? How do we build these unstoppable censorship resistant applications? What is a smart contract? This notion that you can like deploy this automaton into the cloud and it can never be turned off or stopped, and no human actor has a key to like shut the thing down. Like, I think that's a very, very powerful idea. There's a lot of powerful technologies here. I gave a whole list of ones that are up and coming, like the zero knowledge proofs and the secure multi-party computing. Like, these are just enormously powerful technologies. But at the ground floor, so now I'm circling back and trying to answer your question, right? The ground floor of the rabbit hole is the social, right? So we go from the financial to the technical to the social. And so I think, in my mind, the answer to your question, like, what is all this for? It's about reimagining. I mean, this is a big thing to say, but it's really about reimagining human society, right? Given this new set of tools, this new set of primitives. And I think DAOs are a great example of this. Like, I think, nation states, that system has been with us for 400 or 500 years. It's kind of working. It's not working super well. I think we're moving into something else in the future. And I think it's going to be based on a lot of these ideas and these primitives, and like DAOs are going to play a role. So really, it's building better human institutions.
Wow. Thank you so much. For that. I'm amazed right now. That's amazing.
Hey, Lane. Apologize. I'm on my phone. My name's not actually the cooler. It's my pseudo name for my phone. My name's Eric. First saw you on Pete's podcast, What Bitcoin Did. So I really appreciate this talk. I really like what you said on that podcast as well. What I'm really interested, going forward in the space is more what you're talking about towards human governance and law. And my question is, when I tend to look at the space, it seems like we're just reinventing the way that we govern ourselves through law via more efficient contracts. And so when you look at the space going forward in the future, how do you see the interplay between like lawyers helping essentially like developers write laws that will govern society? Because I think you're starting to see it basically, in my view, a DAO is just the basic financial contract, the basic formation of a company that's occurring. And so it's the original law that was created, 300 years ago with the East India Trading Company. It's like the same thing, but it's being done on the web. And so my guess is that this will eventually start to escape into the other forms of law. And I was just wondering how you kind of see that play out, and if you kind of see this interplay between both like lawyers in the technical field and developers. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for that question. I mean, that gets right to the heart of the matter from where I sit. That one of the things that the thing that first attracted me to Ethereum and to the blockchain space was exactly this question, to be honest, right? It's this idea of a smart contract. Like, what is a smart contract? What is smart about it? Is it really a contract? Like, how does it, how is it the same or different from the idea of a legal contract? And just kind of examining that question from the angle of law and legal theory and jurisprudence and all this kind of stuff. It's a very deep rabbit hole, and it's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it. I'm going to own up front, I don't think I'm going to have a good answer to your question, because I think that this is we're going to have to kind of wait and see. But I think, what would I say? I think that there's a very powerful idea at play here, which is that it's kind of the following, right? If you want to participate in the existing economy, you need a lawyer. That's just the reality, right? If you start a job, your company is going to send you an employment contract, right? If you want to invest in a project, you're going to get a 100-page memorandum. You're going to get an investor agreement document, and it's going to be full of legalese and terminology and ideas that make no sense to you if you're not a lawyer. I mean, almost every form of kind of professional engagement, even, think about the terms and conditions when you sign up for an application. You want to buy a water bottle on from some seller on eBay or something. Well, actually, there's a lot of legalese in between you and the other party in that transaction, and that could be the case if you're in the same city or the same state. Now, imagine if you're operating across multiple jurisdictions, multiple countries. It's orders of magnitude more complicated, right? And actually, a great example of this is in an extreme case, something like remittances and correspondent banking, right? If a bank in country A wants to do business with a bank in country B, very often they have to go through a correspondent bank in country C. And so it just spirals out of control very quickly. And the really beautiful thing about a smart contract is that there's a single, relatively straightforward set of rules that all the parties can all read and understand, right? Yes, okay, to some extent, you need to understand code. In the case of Ethereum, that's something like Solidity. But I think the point here is that it's still at least an order of magnitude simpler and more accessible than those legal contracts. It has a lot of the advantages of code. So for example, you can reuse things. It's very modular, right? That's very difficult to do with legal language for a whole host of reasons. And there are orders of magnitude more software developers in the world than there are lawyers, right? So I think it makes the economy, it reduces transaction costs is what it boils down to. So I agree with you. I think we're going to see like DAOs do more and more and more, starting with simple transactions, but I think really over time, moving into very complicated human institutions as DAOs get more mature.
Awesome. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Len.
Thank you for the question.
We have gone over time. So last question, Virtual.
Hey, Lane. Quick question, actually. So, when you were working on kind of earlier on with the Ethereum network and stuff, did you guys envision like the high gas fees and all this stuff that's kind of currently, a pain point, or was this more something that's been up more recently?
That's a good question. Yeah. So just kind of for context, for anyone who's not like super familiar with Ethereum and throughput and congestion and stuff, I mentioned this earlier that the Ethereum network tops out, the current Ethereum 1 network tops out at around 10 transactions per second. It could be a little more, a little less. Like not all transactions in Ethereum are the same. Ethereum uses a unit called gas to meter transactions, right? And gas is proportional to like the amount of resources that a particular transaction consumes. So I can't speak for like the very early days of Ethereum, right? I joined the project in late 2017, as I mentioned. I like to imagine that there was a moment where, what was that? There's a famous Bill Gates quote from, I don't know, like the early 90s or something, where he said like, I'm going to get this totally wrong, but like 64 kilobytes of memory should be pretty much enough for anyone ever. Obviously we now have, live in a world where people have many gigabytes of memory in their computers and it's still not enough. So I imagine maybe someone at some point kind of, scratched their head and said like, 10 transactions per second is going to be more than enough forever. Obviously it's not, but I guess, this first became obvious in late 2017. So not long after I joined Ethereum. It was in November or December of that year when CryptoKitties launched. So for anyone who's not familiar, CryptoKitties is like a game, the first kind of like game that was built on the blockchain on Ethereum, and it involved like breeding cats. They're NFTs, so they're actually like among the very, very, very first NFTs. And the entire network, like they weren't very efficient in the way that they use gas, and so the whole network was like quote unquote attacked or swarmed by CryptoKitties. There's some really fun articles around that time. And so yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer to your question is like it became obvious probably around 2017 as demand really picked up that like we are very, very far from the amount of like network throughput that we need. But the exciting thing is it was totally unclear in 2018, 2019, like what we were going to do about it, how we were going to address it. A lot of the ideas being thrown around at that time, like sharding and plasma and various other things, kind of didn't work out super well. And so the Ethereum roadmap has changed a lot over the years. But now we kind of know, right? Now we have, as I said, this kind of modular blockchain architecture. We have these things called rollups. They're going to give us thousands of transactions per second. I was listening to a podcast today where someone was claiming they're going to achieve 1 million transactions per second, like within the next year on a particular blockchain. So it seems like that problem is kind of close to being solved. So it's an exciting time to be like building applications in this space. It means we're going to have applications that are orders of magnitude more complicated and compute intensive than the ones we had before. And they're going to look and feel a lot more like Web 2 applications, things we're familiar with.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And it was a great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining. Marina, I think you had a question. What was your question?
Well, everyone asked great questions, and my question was asked through the questions that were already asked. So Lane, thank you once again so much for the talk and for answering our questions. To those who hopped on Zoom, thank you as well. And we look forward to having you for our next Tech Talk. We look forward to seeing you again for our next Tech Talk. Thank you so much, Lane. Thank you. We wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the great questions. And again, DMs on Twitter are open. My email address is here. Reach out if you're interested in any of the stuff I talked about. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.